Yo, is this mic on? Yo. Hi. I will actually get my microphone back in the shed at some point. The reason I haven't actually, recorded in the shed in a while, I took it out of the shed for some reason. I took it to my dad's house, and that's where I was last couple videos. Once I actually take the time to go to the shed, put this back in the shed, then we'll start recording in the shed again. Just stop calling it the shed. That sounds like I'm homeless. The studio. I should call it the studio. That makes way more sense. Have a nice life. Have a new album though. We're gonna talk about that shit. Let me tell you about my personal affinity for Have a Nice Life real quick. Have a Nice Life is an extremely appropriate name for these laddos. Not only does that name just fucking scream the oncoming certainty of being isolated until the day you fucking die, but the music they make sounds like it does come from people with utterly zero faith that whoever they're saying this phrase to will actually have a nice life. Don't know if it's just me, but I don't really think they sound too convinced that there's much niceness to be had about life. Despondency is the most prominent thing I take away from their music. Have a Nice Life make very sluggish, self-destructive, and personal shoegaze tunes with completely broken mixing. Intentionally broken mixing. The vocals are reverb to death, and they're buried beneath these drums that sound like they've been bent and damaged beyond fucking belief. If someone listened to a Have a Nice Life song and responded with ugh, why does it sound like that, I wouldn't begrudge them one bit. They often sound quite unstable and claustrophobic, and I think how cloudy the mixing sort of makes their songs feel only hammers home some of the extreme amount of personal effort that clearly went into putting such traumatic and intimate songs to paper. It almost feels as if they have to kind of disguise these stories in some way, because it's all just so much. 2008, they dropped an album called Death Consciousness, and it's considered by many to be their magnum opus. And when I say many, I mean me. It's my favorite album from 2008, I think. This album's actually been quite a serious emotional crutch for me during some of my more deeply contemplative and confused phases in my life. It's a really great album. It's beautiful. It's very long, but it's uncompromising. And in my opinion, it's the perfect case of an album being a flawed masterpiece. There's a lot you could poke in that album and claim to be a bit shit, but, you know, I feel like a lot of that stuff adds to why it's so great. 7 years after that came out, they dropped an album called The Unnatural World, which, whilst it wasn't really quite on the same level of fucking devastating as Death Consciousness, it definitely seemed to have a pretty solid understanding of what makes the band kind of hit home in the first place, which unfortunately Sea of Worry has no fucking clue about. Don't get me wrong though, that's not me saying that Have a Nice Life need to be traumatized on every album, but Sea of Worry just feels like Have a Nice Life are now a shadow of their former self, really. The songs on this new album are easily some of the most predictable and transparent songs I've ever heard from them. It has all the core fundamentals of what you'd expect from Have a Nice Life, but beyond that, there's genuinely really not much to talk about here. I couldn't help but notice how little discourse I was seeing online about this record compared to the new FKA Twigs, which is fucking masterful, by the way. I was thinking, why is that? And then I gave the album a listen, and I realized that there's just so little to dissect. Anything they do bring up that you could dissect is just glossed over in a song or two. And musically, it sounds like every fucking Joy Division song you've ever heard. There are themes on this thing of fatherhood struggles as well as Satanism, but they're only ever touched upon as opposed to being fully explored to spin some kind of message or narrative or concept. And in my personal opinion, the fucking songwriting here is a far cry away from the heart-wrenching imagery they used to have on their earlier stuff. The first couple tracks was all it took to signal me of this album's fucking boredom. They're both packed with these really uncomfortable and tame riffs that feel really anticlimactic. The explosive moments during the choruses of these tracks are just totally underwhelming. It feels like Have a Nice Life are imitating someone else instead of actually kind of building the uniquely tumultuous and destructive world that they are so brilliant at creating. A world that only they can create in the way they do. But they disregard that entirely and make songs like Dracula Bells, which is easily the least interesting song they've ever fucking released. There's not a single musical idea on this song good enough to justify stretching it out for 3 minutes, let alone nearly 8. There's this really boring bit around 4.5 minutes. It gets all broken down to just drums and a distorted bass line, and I think it's attempting to be kind of a creepy little breakdown. It just completely disrupts any flow the song had going for it. Every time it just pulls me out of it. It sounds so cheap. And this is the only time I think the lo-fi kind of cheap sounding production has been a negative for the band. Oftentimes when it comes to Have a Nice Life, I will praise them for opting to make their sound kind of a bit just fractured and lo-fi and gritty. It adds to it a lot of the time, but on songs like Lords of Tresserhorn, which has this really gross, distorted build-up. It's just too tacky for it to leave any punch at all. Because the intent is no longer to be subtle and to be intimate. Now it sounds like it's shooting for something huge. So when you have production this cheap sounding, it really takes a lot away from it, mate. The lyrics on this track also kind of dance around this idea of kind of convincing yourself that everything's gonna be fine during times when it does feel like that is the case, like, you know, just kind of disregarding the possibility of things getting worse in the future. But they tackle this by just repeating, "We're always on top, nothing will ever go wrong," a bunch of times. That's hardly an exploration of this topic, is it? This is what I'm saying about the writing. It's just fucking lame. There's this one lone instrumental track too called "Everything We Forget." It totally fucking sticks out. Like, it comes out of the blue. The way it just blasts on in the track list is a bit random. But all things considered, I actually think it's quite a nice moment. It's actually one of the few moments on the album that genuinely feels like it's establishing some kind of bigger tone or world. In any other album, though, it'd probably be a boring slog, but here, it definitely it set a mood, which some of the other tracks just completely failed to do, honestly. Like, that opening track is the fucking blandest thing they've ever. I'm sorry. Even those noticeably more stripped back and intimate songs like Science Beat just felt fucking squandered to me. The distorted vocals on that track really break any sort of emotional tension the song had going for it in my eyes, and the bleepy synths that come in around 3 minutes. Sound fucking terrible. Those lyrics repeated at the end were certainly quite poetic though, but that's not really enough to save how empty the song feels by the end, really. Trespassers W, for me, actually remains the album's lone W. This song is okay. It's bland, but it's alright. In my opinion, the riffs on this track are actually quite cool. They're some of the most well-performed on the project, easily. The lyrics actually have quite a bit going for them here too, diving into some of the album's more satanic themes, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But they toy with the idea of how a broken relationship can kind of warp your mind into pursuing certain acts of darkness that you just wouldn't consider otherwise, which I actually think is pretty poignant. It's definitely one of the more substantive songs here by far. The last song on this album remains the biggest head scratcher for me though, because it starts off, right, with this giant, tepid, long spoken word bit about the morality behind God sending someone to hell. This is where we get into the Satan shit, baby. As drawn out as this spoken word bit is, it definitely creates a pretty chilling subtext that the rest of the album loosely follows. When you have empty and aimless lyrics like these, we're hardly getting like a clear picture of what kind of impact facing this difficult dilemma is really having on the band here. Like, the music supporting it just feels like tacky retreads of songs they've already done in the past, or someone else has already done in the past. This album is such a frustrating one. It's just so goddamn bland, and then when it actually tries to do something a little bit interesting, they just don't follow it through with anything meaningful whatsoever. This record made me want to go to fucking sleep. Doesn't push the band into any sort of particularly new territory for you to get excited about either, so I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 10. It's a 4 from your boy. It's a shame because I actually love this band a lot, and I'm the only reason I'm being so harsh and shit is because I love them. I want nothing but greatness for these bitches, but yeah, this album was just such a fucking slog. And it's far and away, in my opinion, the worst thing they've done. It's really cool to see that they're still active and making music, and I definitely think they have some great ideas. I just wish they took those ideas and did something kind of uniquely interesting to them with them, instead of, like, you know, just retreading post-punk conventions on a lot of these songs. Just made for a bit of a frustrating listen for me. But I can see it definitely clicking with someone else, so I would say go give it a try if you are a fan of shoegaze and post-punk. And that's everything I gotta say! Thank you for watching my review. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch. I hope you enjoyed the review. I hope you check out the album. Let me know what you think of the album. Let's have a discussion. Personally wasn't into it, as you saw, but how was the record for you? You know, I would love to hear what you guys have to say on it, so yeah, that's everything from me for now. Thank you again so much for watching. I'll see you on the next video. Bye!